Jacob Sterling's empire stretched across cities, his name engraved in glass towers that glittered in the skyline. His wealth commanded respect, his charisma filled boardrooms, and his arrogance poisoned the air around him. To the world, he was a self-made visionary, the epitome of success. But those who worked under him knew another side, a man who measured people not by character, but by class. To Jacob, workers were tools, not humans. His mansion was staffed by servants who obeyed silently, grateful for their wages and fearful of his wrath. Among them was Nancy Whale, a young black woman in her early 30s. She had come into Jacob's service through an agency, desperate to make ends meet. Nancy was different from the others. She carried herself with quiet dignity, even when scrubbing floors or serving food at banquets. Her almond-shaped eyes revealed kindness, her soft voice carried patience, and her presence seemed to soothe even the most hostile spaces. But in Jacob's household she was invisible, just another maid in a starched uniform. His wealthy friends, lounging in silk and diamonds, never once acknowledged her existence. To them, she was part of the furniture, a shadow gliding through gilded halls. Jacob rarely paid attention to his staff, but something about Nancy unsettled him. Perhaps it was her resilience, the way she never faltered under his dismissive remarks. Perhaps it was the flicker of intelligence in her eyes or the unspoken defiance in the way she carried herself despite her lowly position. He told himself it was nothing. But late at night, when the house fell into silence, his gaze would linger on her longer than it should have. One evening, after a party that left the mansion echoing with drunken laughter and clinking glasses, Nancy was left behind to tidy up. Jacob had dismissed the others, but he lingered in his study, whiskey in hand, brooding over some trivial slight from a business rival. When he stepped out into the hallway, he found Nancy quietly stacking empty glasses on a tray. Her head was bent, her braided hair falling over her face, her figure outlined by the dim light. For a moment, he watched her silently. She looked too delicate, too graceful for a servant's life. Something stirred in him, something he had long indulged without restraint. Jacob was a man who believed power entitled him to whatever he wanted, and tonight, he wanted Nancy. She startled when he approached, bowing her head politely. "Sir, I'll be done soon," she murmured. But instead of passing by, Jacob stepped closer, his presence overwhelming her space. "You work too hard, Nancy," he said, his voice low, almost gentle. She forced a smile, uneasy under his gaze. What happened next was swift, cruel, and irreversible. Jacob took advantage of her vulnerability, ignoring the silent plea in her eyes, convincing himself she would be grateful for his attention. When it was over, Nancy fled to her quarters, trembling, ashamed, and shattered. For Jacob, it was just another indulgence, something to be forgotten by morning. For Nancy, it was the night her life changed forever. Weeks later, Nancy's world tilted again. She had been feeling unwell, her stomach twisting with nausea. Fear gripped her as the doctor confirmed the truth. She was pregnant. The room seemed to spin. Alone, unprepared, and barely surviving on her modest wages, Nancy knew the weight of what this meant. But she also knew who the father was. Gathering courage, she approached Jacob one morning as he prepared to leave for the office. Her hands shook as she clutched the folded paper of her medical results. "Sir," she whispered, her throat dry, "I need to speak with you privately." Jacob raised a brow, annoyed by her interruption, but gestured for her to continue. When the words tumbled out, "I'm pregnant. It's yours." His expression hardened into stone. For a moment he said nothing. Then he laughed, a cold, bitter sound that sliced through her hope. "Don't be ridiculous, Nancy. You think because you're carrying a child you can force your way into my life? Into my class?" His eyes narrowed, cruel and dismissive. "You are a maid. Nothing more. I could never marry you. You don't belong in my world." Her lips quivered. "I'm not asking for marriage, I'm asking for responsibility." But Jacob's pride was a fortress. He saw her pregnancy not as a life, but as a threat to his reputation. "This conversation is over. You'll take care of it, or you'll leave." Nancy gasped, the paper trembling in her hand. "Leave? With nothing? Where will I go?" "Anywhere but here," Jacob snapped. "I won't have you tarnishing my name." That evening, Nancy was dismissed without ceremony. A few bills were shoved into her hand, a cruel token meant to buy her silence. She walked out of the mansion with tears burning her cheeks, her belongings crammed into a worn suitcase, the weight of her unborn child pressing against her ribs. For days, Nancy wandered in despair. She rented a small room in a shabby neighborhood, but her savings dwindled quickly. Food became scarce, and fear of the future gnawed at her. She was alone, pregnant, and invisible to the world. One cold evening, hunger drove her into a modest restaurant, her eyes hollow with exhaustion as she sat quietly in a corner, clutching her belly, staring at the menu she could not afford. The waiter hovered impatiently until a voice broke through the silence. "I'll cover her meal," the stranger said. Nancy looked up and saw him, a tall man with kind blue eyes and an aura of gentleness she had almost forgotten existed. He was Nathaniel Grant, a wealthy businessman passing through the city. Unlike Jacob, there was no arrogance in his gaze, only concern. "Please," Nathaniel said softly, sliding into the seat across from her. "You look like you could use a warm meal." Nancy hesitated, pride warring with desperation. But when the food arrived, the aroma broke her resistance, and she ate with trembling hands. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "Thank you." Nathaniel smiled. "No thanks needed. Everyone needs a little help sometimes." Their paths did not end there. Over the weeks, Nathaniel returned, each time offering more support. He listened to her story without judgment, his expression pained at the cruelty she had endured. When her due date neared, he ensured she had proper medical care. And when she gave birth to a beautiful baby boy, Nathaniel was there, holding her hand, tears in his eyes as though the child was his own. Slowly, he helped her rebuild. He invested in her dreams, establishing her in a small business that blossomed under her diligence. He treated her with respect, never once making her feel less because of her past. Love grew quietly between them, built not on lust or power but on compassion and trust. One evening, as they sat on the porch of her modest home, Nathaniel took her hand. "Nancy, you deserve more than survival. You deserve love, a family, and a partner who sees your worth. I want to be that man, if you'll have me." Tears streamed down Nancy's cheeks as she whispered yes. For the first time since her world had shattered, she felt whole again. Thus, what began with betrayal and abandonment ended with a new beginning. Nancy, once discarded by a man who saw her as beneath him, now stood beside Nathaniel, a man who saw her as his equal. Together they raised her son not as a burden of shame, but as a child of hope, a living testament that love and dignity could rise from the ashes of cruelty. But in the shadows of their happiness lingered the memory of Jacob Sterling, a man who had cast her aside, unaware that one day fate would bring them face to face again. The years rolled by like waves against a shore, each one stripping away a little more of Jacob Sterling's invincible aura. On the surface, his empire still gleamed. Glass towers still bore his name, luxury cars still lined his mansion's driveway, and Society magazines still printed his photographs beside headlines of success. But behind the glossy veneer, cracks were spreading. After dismissing Nancy all those years ago, Jacob had wasted no time cementing his place among the social elite. He married Clarissa Beaumont, a glamorous socialite from one of the city's old-money families. She was statuesque, beautiful, and adorned herself with jewels that sparkled as brightly as her practiced smile. Their wedding was the event of the season, a union hailed as a merger of power and wealth. For Jacob, it was a victory. For Clarissa, it was a convenient arrangement. But marriage did not bring him happiness. Clarissa was as cold as the diamonds she wore. She loved the cameras more than her husband, loved galas more than conversations, and loved status more than intimacy. Their union, meant to be a fortress of influence, became a cage of silence. Still, Jacob endured it, convincing himself that appearances mattered more than warmth. After all, he had power, wealth, and a wife who looked perfect on his arm. What more did a man need? Fate answered that question brutally one stormy night. Jacob was returning from a late meeting, his mind clouded with numbers and schemes. Rain lashed against his car's windshield, and visibility was poor. A truck skidded on the slick road, swerving into Jacob's lane. The crash was thunderous, twisting metal and shattering glass. He survived, but barely. Weeks in the hospital blurred into months of painful rehabilitation. When the doctors finally cleared their throats and delivered the prognosis, Jacob felt the ground vanish beneath him. The accident had left him impotent. The word echoed in his mind like a death knell. He had always prided himself on his virility, his ability to command, to conquer. Now, stripped of it, he felt hollow. He avoided mirrors, loathed the pitying glances of his doctors, and drowned himself in silence. At first, Clarissa pretended to care, posting carefully staged photos of herself by his hospital bed for the press. But when the cameras left, so did her tenderness. She grew distant, snapping at him for his moodiness, mocking him in hushed tones. He overheard her on late-night phone calls, her laughter too intimate, her voice too soft for mere friends. Within a year, whispers reached him. Clarissa was entertaining lovers, men who could give her what Jacob no longer could. The Sterling mansion, once alive with banquets and arrogance, became a mausoleum of loneliness. Jacob wandered its halls at night, staring at portraits of himself beside Clarissa, their smiles frozen but empty. He drank too much, avoided company, and spent long hours gazing at the city skyline from his balcony. What gnawed at him most was not Clarissa's betrayal. It was the absence of an heir. His name, his empire, his legacy, all of it was built to endure beyond him. But now, with his condition, there would be no son to inherit it, no bloodline to carry Sterling into the future. His board whispered about succession plans, vultures circling to snatch what he had built. The thought of his empire being ruled by outsiders sickened him, and in those lonely hours, when whiskey dulled his pride and silence echoed too loudly, a memory returned. Nancy Whale, the maid he had discarded, the child he had denied, a child who must, by now, be walking, talking, growing into a young boy. Jacob tried to banish the thought, but it haunted him. He had cast away his only chance at an heir. At first he tried to justify it. She was just a maid. It was a mistake. She was beneath me. But the excuses rang hollow. What he remembered most was not the scandal he feared, but the look in Nancy's eyes when he cast her out. Hurt, betrayed, but dignified even in despair. He had crushed her, and she had walked away without a fight. Now, he wondered where she was. What had become of her? Did the child resemble him? Did he laugh the way Jacob once laughed as a boy? Did he inherit the sharp Sterling eyes? The questions tormented him. It was at a prestigious charity gala, held in the grand ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel, that Jacob's past collided with his present. He attended reluctantly, dragged there by Clarissa, who needed his presence to keep up appearances. The chandeliers glittered, champagne flowed, and the city's elite mingled in gowns and tuxedos. Jacob stood at the edge of the room, nursing a glass he had no intention of finishing, his expression a mask of boredom. Then he saw her. Nancy. She was across the room, radiant in an elegant evening gown, her posture graceful, her smile poised. She was no longer the maid in a plain uniform, but a woman of confidence and dignity, speaking with donors, laughing softly, her presence commanding respect. Jacob froze, his heart pounding. For a moment, he thought he was hallucinating. But no, it was truly her. Beside her stood Nathaniel Grant, the well-known philanthropist and businessman, shaking hands and exchanging words with politicians. Nancy was at his side, not as a servant, but as his wife, representing him at the gala with eloquence and charm. They moved together like partners, equals bound by respect and affection. Jacob's throat tightened. The memory of dismissing her, of mocking her as not his class, returned with a cruel twist. She had risen far above the class he once condemned her to. She belonged in this world, not because of his validation, but because she had rebuilt herself with another man's love. For the first time in years, Jacob felt small, watching Nathaniel place a gentle hand on Nancy's back, watching the warmth in her eyes as she looked at her husband. Jacob's chest constricted. He had thrown her away like refuse, but Nathaniel had seen her worth and lifted her higher than Jacob ever could. Guilt crashed over him in waves. He remembered the night he betrayed her, the cruelty of his laughter when she begged for responsibility, the way he shoved her out into the cold, and now here she was, not broken but radiant, not desperate, but thriving. She had everything he lacked: love, family, dignity. Jacob's hand trembled as he set down his glass. For the first time in his life, he envied another man not for his wealth or power, but for his love. Nathaniel had what Jacob could never buy. He couldn't stop staring. Memories bled into the present. Her quiet service in his mansion, the night he took what wasn't his, the moment she walked away with tears in her eyes. And then the thought of the child returned, sharper than ever. That boy was his blood, his heir, his only chance to leave a mark beyond money and buildings. Jacob Sterling, once untouchable, now stood humbled in a crowded ballroom. No speech, no fortune, no power could undo what he had done. He realized, with a sting sharper than any wound, that the greatest loss of his life was not his accident, not Clarissa's betrayal, not even his fading empire. It was Nancy, and the son he had never known. The charity gala ended late into the night, but Jacob Sterling's mind remained restless long after the last champagne flute was emptied and the final notes of music faded. He had seen ghosts walking in flesh. Nancy, the woman he had betrayed, standing proud and radiant beside her husband Nathaniel. And though he had tried to mask it with arrogance, his heart had cracked wide open. For days afterward, Jacob could not focus on business. Numbers blurred, meetings droned, and Clarissa's shrill voice grated more than ever. His mind returned again and again to that night, to Nancy's elegance, to the way people respected her, to the soft curve of her smile when she looked at her husband. He had never seen her look that way at him. He knew what he had to do. It was not easy for a man like Jacob to humble himself. He had built his empire on pride, on the certainty that he was untouchable. But the weight of regret was heavier than any empire. Through quiet inquiries, he learned where Nancy and Nathaniel lived, an estate not far from the city, surrounded by manicured lawns and blooming gardens. The thought of her in a mansion that wasn't his clawed at him, but he pushed it aside. One crisp morning, Jacob arrived at her gates. He had dismissed his driver, choosing to come alone. His cane tapped against the driveway as he walked, a constant reminder of his accident and his fragility. When Nancy appeared on the porch, her eyes widened in shock. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of years. "Jacob," she said at last, her voice cautious, guarded. He removed his hat, his hand trembling. "Nancy, I had to see you." Her expression hardened, but she stepped aside, granting him entry. The home was warm, filled with light and the faint scent of flowers. Family photos lined the mantel: Nathaniel, Nancy, and a boy with bright eyes and a mischievous grin. Jacob's chest ached as his gaze lingered on the child's photograph. "I owe you an apology," Jacob began, his voice rough with shame. "For everything. For what I did to you. For sending you away. For abandoning you when you needed me most." Nancy folded her arms, her gaze steady. "An apology doesn't erase the past, Jacob." "I know," he whispered, "but I had to say it." He sank into a chair, his shoulders slumped, a shadow of the proud man he once was. I was in an accident. The doctors, they told me I'll never father children again. Clarissa doesn't care. She has her affairs, her parties, and me. I'm left with nothing. No love, no family, no heir. His voice cracked as he looked at her. But you have my son, my blood, my only chance at a legacy. Nancy, I'm begging you, let me claim him as mine. Let him carry my name. Please, give me that boy. The words hung in the air like poison. Nancy's heart pounded. Part of her had expected him to ask for forgiveness. But this? To demand the child he had once disowned? She stared at him, her mind swirling with memories. The night he used her, the cruelty of his laughter when she told him she was pregnant, the way he shoved her out with nothing, and now, after all these years, after he had married another, he dared to ask for the son she had raised through tears and sacrifice. Her voice trembled with controlled fury. You didn't want him then. You cast us out like dirt beneath your shoes, and now, when life has taken from you, you come asking for what you abandoned? Jacob's eyes brimmed with desperation. I was a fool, Nancy. Blind with pride, drunk on class and status. I see it now. I see what I lost. That boy is mine. He has my blood. Don't I deserve a chance to know him? To pass on something before I die? Nancy turned away, her chest heaving. Forgiveness was one thing. She had long since healed, with Nathaniel's love piecing her back together. But this request tore at old wounds. How could she give away the son who had been her anchor through the darkest nights? The boy who called Nathaniel Papa with joy in his voice. She pressed her hands together, whispering a prayer for strength. Jacob's plea tugged at a part of her heart she wished she could silence, the memory that he was, indeed, the boy's biological father. But love was not in blood alone. Love was in sleepless nights, in scraped knees kissed better, in stories whispered at bedtime. Love was in Nathaniel's unwavering presence. As if summoned by her turmoil, Nathaniel entered the room. His tall frame radiated calm strength, his eyes flicking from Nancy's tense posture to Jacob's desperate expression. What's going on? He asked softly. Nancy opened her mouth, but Jacob spoke first. I want my son, Grant. He's my heir, my only chance to leave a legacy. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but his tone remained measured. Your son? That boy has one father, and it isn't you. I was there when he was born. I held him when he cried. I taught him his first steps. I've been his father every day of his life. Jacob's face crumpled. But he's my blood. Nathaniel stepped closer, his gaze steady. Blood makes a child. Love makes a father. You abandoned Nancy when she needed you. You abandoned your son before he even drew breath. Don't come here now and try to claim what you threw away. Nancy felt tears spill down her cheeks. Nathaniel's words wrapped around her like armor. She turned to him, and he gave her a small nod of encouragement. Nancy faced Jacob again, her voice firm, though her tears betrayed her heart. Jacob, I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine. I refuse to let bitterness chain me anymore. But forgiveness does not mean I will give you what you ask. Jacob shook his head, disbelief etching his features. You would deny me even now? Yes, she said, her tone unwavering. Because that boy is not yours. You abandoned him before he was born. Nathaniel has raised him, loved him, been the father you never were. That child belongs to the man who stayed, not the man who left. Her words struck Jacob like a blow. His shoulders slumped, his eyes glassy. He had expected anger, perhaps even hatred. But her calm certainty, her refusal to yield, was worse. She had forgiven him, yet she denied him the one thing he craved. Out of compassion, Nancy added softly, but I will let you meet him. Not as his father, because you are not, but as a man who wishes to see what he cast aside. Later that afternoon, Jacob found himself in the garden, sitting on a bench as the boy approached. He was around 10, full of energy, with Nancy's warmth in his smile and a spark in his eyes that reminded Jacob painfully of himself. The boy tilted his head curiously. "Who's this, Mama?" he asked. Nancy knelt beside her son. "This is Mr. Sterling, an old acquaintance of mine. He wanted to meet you." The boy extended a hand with innocent politeness. "Hello, sir." Jacob's hand trembled as he shook it. His throat closed as he studied the boy's face, the life and joy radiating from him. A son, his son, yet not his at all. The boy chatted lightly about his school, his friends, his love for soccer. Jacob listened, tears stinging his eyes, each word twisting the knife deeper. This was everything he had lost. The laughter of a child, the bond of family, the legacy of fatherhood. And he knew he could never claim it. When it was time to leave, Jacob lingered by the door, his cane heavy in his hand. He turned to Nancy, his voice breaking. "Thank you for letting me see him, for forgiving me. I don't deserve it." Nancy nodded, her eyes kind but resolute. "We all live with the choices we make, Jacob. I chose to survive. You chose to cast us aside. And now we both live with those consequences." Nathaniel placed a protective arm around Nancy's shoulders, their son clinging to his other hand. Jacob watched them, a family, whole and strong in a way he would never know. As he stepped out into the fading light, Jacob felt both broken and strangely at peace. He had asked for redemption and had been denied. But he had been given something else: forgiveness. It was not enough to heal the emptiness in his soul, but it was more than he deserved. And so Jacob Sterling returned to his lonely mansion, carrying with him the image of a boy's smile, the heir he could never claim, the family he could never have. Meanwhile, Nancy walked back into her home, stronger than ever, knowing she had faced her past and chosen her future. She held her son close, her husband's hand in hers, and whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. For though Jacob had wealth, she had love. And in the end, love was the greater treasure. Thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel. Your love, comments, and shares mean everything to me. Grateful for each of you. Let's keep growing together.